remember, though, that above all, this is a war of propaganda. And I would think almost nothing one reads in the Western press about the invasion of Ukraine is to be trusted. Ukraine is simply a pawn in this, but the object, as the US Defense Secretary is, and I paraphrase him, is to destroy the Russian Federation. That's been known for a long time. That is probably the most dangerous project in the world today, because the Russians are not going to allow that.
In a book titled Orwell on Freedom, the late British writer said that in England, the immediate enemies of truthfulness and hence of freedom of thought are the press lords, the film magnates, and the bureaucrats. And so far as freedom of expression is concerned, there is not much difference between a mere journalist and the most unpolitical, imaginative writer. The journalist may distort and caricature reality in order to make his meaning clearer. For he did a number of political commentaries for that broadcasting corporation. And though it is currently under scrutiny, with its biggest funding threat yet, it is still highly respected by countries around the world, where some see it as a model. It has the largest global outreach than any other global media corporation, and is described as the UK's biggest soft power weapon. But Russia views it as a propaganda arm for the invisible government that uses its influential platform to also market disinformation. For the information war is the globalist attempt of controlling the mainstream narrative and ban dissenting voices who may have a certain level of influence within the global digital media space. NATO has been training the Ukraine military for years, according to the Wall Street Journal, so she has been provoking Russia for a while now. And the UK military, the US military, the opportunist puppet celebrities in Hollywood who raise billions, and the Western churches created and developed a solidarity, and the reason big tech, who receives the instructions from the invisible government, are clamping down on dissenting voices, because in both Africa and Asia, many are decolonizing their thinking and do not want to be drawn into a Western conflict. And here is one of the reasons why. Mr. Zelensky, the president of the Ukraine, is introduced by Klaus Schwab at the World Economic Forum in Davos in the year 2022. Now, Mr. Zelensky is a member of the World Economic Forum, according to their own website. And while he complains about Russia's war crime cover-ups, his own government is also realizing that the Western bankers in both the United States and the United Kingdom are colluding with Russia. That includes JP Morgan, HSBC, Citigroup, and Crédit Agricole. So who or what can you rely on to give you an honest and clear insight into what is going on in the world? There is actually something that foretells the rise and the fall of empires in both the East and in the West, that foretells of its spiritual degeneration. And men in the least expected places have read a very misunderstood volume and have a much clearer insight on world affairs via the power of Bible prophecy. A Scotsman left the Highlands and expanded his horizons by migrating to New York in North America. And Alexander MacLeod, who refused to give communion for any of his congregation who held slaves, said that God hath also appointed the time of the fall of empires. In his calendar are marked the hours of dissolution, agreeably to which every nation must have its doom. The decline and fall of the Roman Empire, the ravages of the Saracens, the commencement and destruction of the Ottoman Empire, the rise, progress, and downfall of the papal authority and of the European governments connected with the anti-Christian system, and the relation which all these celestial movements have to the church, Christ reveals to us by his servant John, shows that they are absolutely under his government, and that after he has shaken and overturned all the thrones of iniquity, he will confer the greatness, the kingdom, and the dominion under the whole heaven upon the saints of the Most High. But another man knew this also. On a road called Beaumont Crescent in West London in England was once the office of a Jamaican man, his secretary Miss White, his Grenadian clerk Mr. McIntyre, and a South African woman and her Ethiopian husband who was his private nurse. It was the English headquarters of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, better known as the UNIA, that was founded by Marcus Mosiah Garvey, where a worn-out plaque still has his name on it. The late Marcus Garvey led a mass global Pan-African movement whose aim was to better the spiritual and economic conditions of the black race all over the world, and his second wife Amy Jack Garvey was his spiritual support and backbone, who preserved his legacy in a book on his philosophy and opinions. But what impact does he still have on the world? In the 21st century, a word has resurfaced and is trending that is agitating the Western world, and it is being misused out of its original context. It is a word called woke. Every single day, you're seeing article upon article in the English press with complaints that the Western Anglo-Saxon culture is becoming woke and it is upturning centuries-old traditions. But the word woke is black slang from the 1930s in North America that the black community used to keep themselves racially aware of their condition, as documented in the New York Times. The Washington Post in February 2022 tells us who was one of the true pioneers of woke. And it read that in 1937, black nationalist leader Marcus Garvey, who advocated that black Americans physically return to Africa, was a strong proponent of a mental return to the mother continent before physical repatriation could take place. We are going to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery, Garvey said. For though others may free the body, none but ourselves can free the mind.
The problem is that on the very day that Putin invaded Ukraine, you shook hands with him in the Kremlin. That suggests, at least that you endorse what he's doing in Ukraine.
I was speaking in Urdu. I was talking about getting rid of mental slavery. We still have the colonial education system with elite is taught in English medium. We had first time in our history had one syllabus for everyone, and I said that mental slavery is far worse than physical slavery. In that context, I refer to Afghanistan, where physical, Right.
Marcus Garvey's Pan-African movement had chapters in Africa, Europe, Canada, North and South America, and throughout the Caribbean that had its own flag, its own anthem, its own newspapers where blacks were paying into its stocks and bonds to finance his shipping line. And he had his own Bill of Rights also. For this man was building up an African empire, a black economic new world order. And it is only when you read the telegrams to the British Colonial Office, now the Foreign Office, that are preserved in the National Archives, you realize the extent of his drive, where the UNIA were even recognized by a number of Caribbean states. And he raised $25,000 in Costa Rica within 48 hours in the 1920s. This man was doing crowdfunding a century ago. And when the Western powers were watching him very carefully, they knew that if his shipping line was to become a success, it would have totally disrupted the entire trade of the economic monopolies of the Western European colonial governments. But it would not have worked. You see, when you are a true student of prophecy, you can see way beyond race, nationality, and patriotism, and you see the bigger picture of how it is all going to end. And Garvey himself knew that it would all end at the second coming of Christ. And when he was incarcerated in America, he wrote a poem, and Garvey said that the Christian world is yet to be saved. Man, since the risen Christ, has not behaved. wanton, reckless, wicked, he still remains, causing grief, sorrow, tears, and human pains. Can we show the godly light to anyone, seeking for earnest truth while marching on? If so, friend, let us tell you now and here, for love, freedom, and justice, let's all prepare. God, in his glorious might, is coming. You see, he believed in the second coming of Christ. Wonderful signs he is ever showing. Unrest, earthquakes, hurricanes, floods, and storms are but revelations of heavenly forms. The narrator would like to ask a very serious question. It's just a query. Do you think it is possible that the powers that be are aware that they are actually fulfilling prophecy?